The engine is extraordinary. It takes some time. In the same way that the F1, and one of the things I love about the F1 is it's a car that, partly because of suspension, but it takes time to get to know.
Yeah.
And you have to concentrate in it. And it's exactly the same in T50. It's a car you can't just jump in and school off down the road and feel like you've got it all sorted, or certainly I can't.
Yeah.
Because the engine it's almost terrifying to start with.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's madness the way it revs.
Does it feel, at least in our imaginations, what a sort of 1990s Formula One engine might be like?
Yeah. It's certainly what sprang to mind.
Yeah.
It's so responsive and sharp, and you think, how on earth am I going to be able to heel and toe?
Yeah, of course.
Because of course you've got a manual gearbox.
Yeah.
And there have been, I'm sure you've had cars where we've had paddle shift gearboxes, and you think, actually, would this really work with a manual? It's a good thing it's got paddle shift. Well, all those arguments suddenly seem to become null and void, because here is this car with an engine that exceeds it by factor of whatever.
Yeah.
And it's got a manual gearbox. And I think the manual gearbox is interesting. The way they've gone with the manual gearbox is interesting to that extent, because it's not the slickest gearbox. You drive something like a Boxster or Cayman with that lovely 6-speed manual. That is what we sort of think of as just a fantastic sort of feel, and you can drive off down the road and it's beautiful. That's not the experience in T50, because it's a much sort of weightier, more mechanical, almost sort of more motorsport gearbox. Which
so the emphasis being, the priority being, don't wrong slot it.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Which again with F1. Lovely gear shift, but pretty narrow across the gate, and that second to third shift. Yeah, I don't think I remember really shifted without sort of just that
kind of hoping,
kind of slight sort of as you bring your left foot up. But you don't have that at all with T50. When it's warm, and it gets better as it gets warm. Yeah, and you're really going for it. You just don't think about it with that gearbox. It is.
That's a nice thing too, isn't it? When you last drive a car whose gearbox got better when it won. My Caterham does that. His gearbox gets better when you want. Yeah. And used to, even things like shock absorbers used to get better when they want. Yes. Probably do in the T50 too. Yeah. Sorry, we digress.
No. It's a big part of it. I think it feels like that sort of that living thing, and it was the same in the F1, and it's another of those similarities that seems to sort of carry through with it. But yeah, when you drive that car quickly, that's when everything comes together, makes sense. Anything that you sort of think, I'm not sure I'd have done it like that, or I couldn't sort of, maybe it's not quite as usable here, or maybe the MVH is a bit worse than the F1 there. It feels like it's all been done for that driving experience when you are on it, and it's doing everything that it's meant to do, and that makes it slightly more compromised, but equally, the high is so high when you're driving it like that, that I would forgive it all those, any impracticalities or anything like that, because I wouldn't want to think that any of that experience could be sacrificed.
It is built for that moment, isn't it? Yeah. And as we've mentioned, the engine is a little 4-litre V12, again Cosworth. Yeah. And what does it produce power-wise?
661 brake horsepower, so it's not a lot more than the F1 to that extent.
627 or something in the F1.
Does it feel, when I last drove an F1, which was just before COVID, I was shocked by how fast it still felt. It still felt to me, and we had all the other toys out. We had a P1 there, and we had a Senna and various other things. And the F1 still felt like a mighty, mighty, explosively, shockingly fast car. Yeah. Does the T50 feel in a different performance category even to that? On paper, it should be quite a lot faster. And even in a straight, I'm just talking in straight line terms here.
Yes, it's.
I guess it doesn't have the torque, does it?
It doesn't have the torque. No, it's not, because I think the interestingly there's a direct. I think it's 479 pounds-feet in the F1.
Definitely
and
is
479 Newton meters.
Okay.
So it's not a lot of torque, is it?
Okay. That's a big difference, and presumably 479 Newton meters at quite a few revs.
Exactly. So, but performance, let's say, never feels lacking in T50.
Sure.
Not for 1 second, because it's just that to try and rev it out
to 12.
12.4 hard limiter.
12.4.
Yeah. And it's, if you've driven things like, I remember like 911R, sort of, and there was that, manual gearbox, natural aspirated engine, revving to 9,000 RPM, and it took a little bit of sort of, you had to steel yourself to really go all the way to the rev limiter.
Absolutely.
And it's the same feeling in that, but kind of squared.
More so.
Because you get to 8 and you think this is nuts, and you still got the really exciting 4,000 RPM to go.
And does it have, I guess it must have a pronounced sort of cam effect. Presumably it just gets madder and madder.
Yeah.
And it's pulling at 9,000 revs in a way it doesn't pull at 4,500 revs.
Yeah, it's remarkably smooth, kind of low down, and actually sort of tractable and easy to use pottering around, which is fantastic. And that was something which obviously GMA really wanted. They didn't want it to just be
but the natural balance of the V12 really helps with that, and that's why all Ferrari V12s, all the way you can drive a V12 Ferrari from 1949, and I've done it, and they do that. And 1.5 litre Ferrari V12 from 1949. It won't have any performance, but it will just pull so beautifully and creamily from no revs at all. Yeah.
And it's that lovely thing to be able to do in engines with such a high rev limit. So
blimey.
But it is quite scary. As I say, you get into it and you first of all think, am I going to be able to heel and toe? And you sort of, it's got a rev matching function on it, which again is something you'd sort of think, actually, you read it on paper and you think that's anathema. Gordon's gone soft, giving us things like this.
Okay. Did you use it? Were you using it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All the time.
I think you were.
Not all the time. No, because you use it as when you first get into it, and or if you're, I suppose, pottering around, sort of kind of, it's nice to have.
Yeah. Because
it just lets you tune your ear into it, because it's so different.
Yeah.
And you want to understand. If the car can do it for you, then you just attune to it, and then you turn it off.
Yeah.
And once you're there, once you've got your feet sorted and you're used to, you put in sport for the throttle map, so it's a completely linear throttle map, and you want to be driving it around.
Yeah.
Without this.
Because we should explain that this engine, one of the extraordinary things about this engine, and the F1 did it to, I thought, an amazing extent at the time, but I suspect it's nothing compared to what the T.50 does. Is they almost don't have flywheels, do they?
No.
Which means basically, if you take your foot off the accelerator, the engine stops.
Yeah.
It just goes.
Yeah.
And that sense of sort of decay in the engine as it sort of quietly spools down, but is kept going from the momentum of an enormous flywheel. It just doesn't there, is it?
No.
It's like what? And that's it, and it stops. And that's what, and actually thinking about that, that's what must make the whole heel and toe thing really quite difficult, because the engine, it's not just the speed at which the engine accrues revs, actually probably as remarkable and as shocking and as different as the speed at which it loses rev, which is essentially instantaneous.
Yeah. It's quite a thing to get your head around.